All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast where we're still covering the Big 12 and the transfer portal, any transfer portal news, new additions for these teams. We're covering Kansas State today. They made quite a bit of moves over the offseason. A lot of people are high up on Kansas State coming into this next year with PJ Haggerty. What do we think about as a whole how these players fit into the Kansas State system? We're going to start off with Cody.
Yeah, I think they did some really good things, and I think they did some not so good things. Starting with Haggerty, obviously he was probably the best guard in the portal. He's not a one man offense, but he's probably going to bring Jerome Tang's offense into the top 50 to 75 pretty much by himself, just because of his scoring ability at all three levels and his ability to get to the line at a super high level and play in transition. He does so many things well that, I believe he had a 52% free throw rate and he shot 75% on those attempts. So he's going to be great. He's at his best when he's scoring at the rim. He's in the 97th percentile in rim attempts per game, and it's really tough to contain when he's getting downhill. It's not the most creative. Like in the half court, he obviously prefers to play in transition, but he can play in pretty much every setting possible. So obviously Haggerty is a fantastic get, and one that the Kansas State fans are going to love. And I guess a couple other pieces. I'm pretty high on Kamari McGriff from UNC Wilmington. I think he does a lot of things well on the offensive end. Firstly, he gets on the offensive glass. He's really versatile in pick and roll, in short roll, and a little bit as a lob threat. And he's pretty good on the offensive glass, a 10% offensive rebound rate. That's not fantastic for a five-man, but playing alongside a guy like Tyreek Smith, who's another guy they brought in, a vet who can get on the offensive glass as well. I think that's going to be a really good duo. So I'm pretty high on Kamari McGriff overall. I think he could actually be the second best player on this team when it's all said and done. I know Nate Johnson is pretty good. He's a really good two-way guard. I'm pretty excited about what he can do on the defensive end over the offensive end. Like playing next to Haggerty, it's going to be a little bit of an odd fit just because Johnson doesn't really shoot it off the catch that well. But ultimately, I think they're going to be really good on the defensive end, those two together. But yeah, I like McGriff, and obviously Haggerty's great. And I'll talk about the other pieces a little bit later after we hear Marcus's thoughts.
Yeah, I think Haggerty obviously as good a get as any most would consider in the country. Best guard out there probably. Gonna create instant offense. It really just gives them like a guy, like a true number one, right? Who can generate his own shot, who is highly successful at getting to the foul line. I think he averaged about 8 free throws a game last year, 10 the year before that. So he can get to the line, to help that offense where the offense wasn't all that good last year. The other thing too about their pickups, they improved, I think, in the shooting department. I think they were like 265th in the country in 3-point percentage last year. They got Haggerty, who's an efficient 3-point shooter, 36%. Bashir, he's 38%. I know, Cody, you said he takes 10 threes a game.
Yeah.
So high volume, pretty good percentage considering the volume. Nate Johnson has the ability to get hot. He's not, like you said, not great off the catch, but did have some big games, especially in the MAC tournament this past year. So he has the ability to make some shots. So overall, I do like Nate Johnson. Like Cody said, that was a guy, in watching some of the MAC tournament this past March. He had 31, I think, in the semis and then 22 in the final against Miami, Ohio. Both very efficient games. So it's going to depend what version of him we get, because then he was 1 for 9 in their tournament game against Arizona. Granted, he did get to the line, I think, 12 times, made 11 of them in that game. So really is going to depend what version of Nate Johnson they get. Hopefully it's the one that can provide a little bit more scoring punch for them and get hot. But having Haggerty is certainly going to help.
Yeah, so we've talked about, some of the transfer moves we do like. Cody, you touched base that you don't like as much some of their moves. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't really like how two guys fit, although like the raw numbers are really good for Bashir and Marcus Johnson. I just don't see how their games are going to translate to the Big 12 level. I guess starting with Bashir, I mean, a lot of his volume was on the ball, and to be honest, he's a really talented perimeter shot maker. He just doesn't really do it in many other areas, and I think Big 12 athleticism is really going to bother him. The scouting report is going to be stay connected to him, just run him off the 3-point line, and he's not really going to provide all that much value. He takes some really bad shots at times, and he got away with it playing in the CAA, just not playing as high level athleticism. Yeah, he's a bigger guard that was able to shoot over the top of a lot of those guys, and playing in the Big 12 level, probably playing the 3 a lot. I don't think he's gonna have a matchup where his matchup is more athletic than he is, and I think he's really going to struggle to create any form of offense. He struggled in the mid range area, and he really struggled at the rim. I believe he was like an 8th percentile rim scorer, and like for being a 6'6", like longer athlete, you would have to assume that he would be a little bit better than that, especially playing in the mid ranger ranks. But it just wasn't the case. He's got a slight frame and gets knocked off of his spots really easily. So, and it comes down to whether he's going to be willing to play off the ball or not. He had a sky high usage rate at Monmouth, so I'm a little worried about his game translating. And then a guy like Marcus Johnson as well. He was more of a post hub at Bowling Green, but here, I mean, it's not going to be the case. I mean, this is PJ Haggerty's offense, and when it's not his offense, it's probably going to be in the hands of Nate Johnson or maybe even Kamari McGriff a little bit through the post. Like Johnson's going to be coming off the bench. He's going to need to provide some value like off the ball, which he actually he can make shots off the catch, but he's just not going to be able to create any separation. He's not any form of a movement shooter. Like he's very limited from an athletic standpoint. He's probably going to be more of a guy that sits in the corner and is more of a floor spacer for this team, and maybe coming off the bench when Haggerty goes to the bench, you can play through him a tad. But I just think he's going to be very limited against Big 12 athleticism as well. And he really struggles at the rim too. For being 6'7", 260, he creates like solid position, but he's unable to finish because he doesn't have any sort of vertical leap. So, and he doesn't get to the line at a high rate. I really don't like how either one of those guys grade out, and their secondary qualities aren't really there, and neither one of them defend either. Like they're probably two of the worst defenders that I've scouted so far during this transfer portal process, and they're definitely negatives on this end. So they're going to have to be shot makers or provide some form of secondary abilities if they're going to be able to play any sort of minutes for this team.
Definitely some concerns. Marcus, do you share these concerns same as Cody, or what do you think? Are you not as concerned with these other transfers besides Haggerty?
I mean, there's obviously, I think, concern. Like Kansas State, it's much harder in the Big 12 to get recruits there. They're very fortunate to have gotten Haggerty. I think Haggerty's going to probably be able to mask some issues just because he's really good and he's experienced and has led a team, as we saw at Memphis. There's concern, but I think Haggerty will be able to kind of ground them a little bit and make up for it to a point. I think their ceiling isn't overly high still, but I think obviously having Haggerty puts them in a better situation than they were last year.
What are our final thoughts about this team? Has it gotten worse? Has it gotten better from previous season?
I think they've gotten better. Like, I just ripped into a couple of the guys that they brought in, but I actually like what they've done for the most part. I like Johnson. I like Haggerty. Obviously, there's not much to hate about Haggerty. He's the ultimate floor raiser for an offense, like I mentioned earlier. And I really like the two-way ability of Tyreek Smith and Kamari McGriff. I think they're two really good rim protectors. I think they're solid two-way rebounders. And I think it's one of the more underrated front court duos that, the transfer portal, of a transfer portal that has provided especially from K-State. I think they've done a pretty good job in that area. I mean, I haven't touched on Andrea Kostic at all, Serbian coming in. Haven't done any work on him yet, but he projects to be one of their first guards off the bench. So maybe he can provide some relief in that area if Bashir's traits aren't able to translate. But overall, I do like what they've done from a whole. I think the defense it's always going to be good under Tang. He always has really good rim protectors. I think they've had a top 25 to 30 defense in the country every single year since he's taken over. It's just been the offensive end that's been a little bit iffy, but I think Haggerty is going to be a big reason why. I think this team ends up getting in the tournament, but obviously I think Bashir is going to have to provide a little bit of shooting and at least play 15 to 20 minutes a game to make that happen. But ultimately, I like what they did.
Marcus, what's your prediction for this subject?
Yeah, I think they're better than last year. I mean, last year they finished 16-17 overall, 9-11 in the league. They'll be better than that. I would say up a few spots there. There's still, I think, obviously, as we've talked about, clear-cut top, and then a little bit more hazy once it gets into that middle of the pack. So can they be a little bit better than some of those other middle of the pack teams and win those tight games? I think they can because they have Haggerty. They have a closer. They have a guy that can lead an offense. So I'm going to say with Cody, as of right now, I do think they probably have a solid chance at sneaking in probably to the back end of that tournament. They feel like they could end up being like a classic 8-9 game. They could be like the 12-15 tip on Thursday of March Madness. Well, let's save this in case that does happen. But I'm excited for what they've done. I think like I said, their ceiling isn't crazy, but it's definitely higher than it was last year.
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I'm definitely excited to see how the star power of Haggerty elevates this team. But that'll do it for this episode. As always, thank you everybody for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.